It's important to understand when you look at this, you see a kid. When I look at him, I see a psychopath.
Hi guys, thanks for joining me today. You know that term, getting away with murder? Yeah, today's video kind of examples that definition. Genuinely, if ever there is a case where I think the title should be, they got away with murder, hashtag probably twice, this is going to be the one that absolutely fits that description. And for those of you new to my channel, I do deep dives twice weekly here on my main channel, and I also do lots more on Patreon and YouTube membership. Thank you to every single one of you who supports me there. Without you, I can't do this. This is why I get to make a ton of crime content. If you like my stuff, please give me a like. If you have not subscribed yet, but you come back, please do subscribe. It makes a big difference to me. And also make sure you get your notifications on so you never miss an episode. Whoa, guys, today's case is going to leave you blindsided. I'm just going to make it clear in the very beginning of this that you are, without a shadow of a doubt, going to feel perplexed at the end of this particular video, if not disturbed, probably a mixture of both. Because when I talk about Collin Griffith, the 17-year-old young man who features in this video, I am talking about someone that I believe is truly disturbed. And whilst I wouldn't use the term natural born killer, because I genuinely think there are elements of this case where this particular individual has been formed, I cannot express how badly wrong I believe this case has gone. I cannot believe it. And again, if you don't know this case, stay with me, absolutely strap in, because like I said, it's going to leave you breathless. It really is. Let's go back to the 8th of September 2024. This is when all of this begins to play out. 17-year-old Collin Griffith fatally stabs his mother, Katherine. And that's a tragedy in itself, of course, when somebody loses their life in any circumstance. But a year earlier, just a year earlier, this same Collin Griffith had shot and killed his father. Now that death was ruled out as self-defense, but here we are now, dealing with a scenario where the other parent is also dead. And there'll be a story told of these people as parents being abusive, but couldn't it just be that he's a cold-blooded killer? Now maybe that's controversial to say, but I think when two bodies turn up, maybe we do need to dig a little bit deeper into our understanding of the case and also the psyche of the individual perpetrator. So with that in mind, let's talk about Collin Griffith. He was born 16th of March 2007 in Lincoln County, Oklahoma. His father was, because obviously his father is no more, Charles Griffith, and his mother was Katherine Griffith. He also had an older brother, Christopher, who's an adult at the time of his crimes. Now we get to May 2020. Understandably, this is going to be a period of time which is going to be challenging for all parties because Griffith's parents divorced. Now they've been together 20 years. So even if the relationship had been imperfect during that 20 years, it's something that means there is a position of familiarity about the relationship. So children growing up with parents who've been together for decades feel, no matter how imperfect the relationship is, that it's permanent. So absolutely it can destabilise the way that somebody feels psychologically and emotionally. And it changes the social experience and lived experience of all involved. Now, it's worth noting that Katherine actually accused Charles, her husband and soon-to-be ex-husband at this point, of decades of abuse. And whenever there are accusations of abuse, clearly it means that they're leaving the relationship on negative terms. And that can also play in further to the way that the divorce goes through. And it does begin a very acrimonious custody battle as well. And I think that a lot of people who've been through this, I've been through this myself, not a custody battle, because very fortunately it was agreed that I would have residency of my children when I got divorced from my first husband. And essentially, even when you are trying to do it in the best possible way, when you're trying to be grown up about the scenario, it's really challenging on every level, because financially it's challenging, dealing with childcare situations is challenging, knowing what's right for your children is challenging. And if you add any more things to that, any more variables to that, it can really cause anxiety and stress. And if one parent is accusing the other parent of being abusive and is trying to retain custody of the child, and the other parent feels that that's either unfair, or let's say they are an abuser and wishes to retain power, understandably, it's going to cause conflict and the child becomes a pawn in those situations. And we all know time and time again this happens. We understand that the family courts are constantly dealing with children being used as weapons to punish each parent, as opposed to them actually considering the needs and welfare of the children that they've born. Now, Katherine ends up moving to Port Charlotte, Florida. She actually worked as an online school teacher, and at this point, Griffith stayed in Oklahoma with his father. So she essentially goes somewhere else, starts her career online, and is getting by doing those things. But clearly there will be fractures within her own experience because her child is not with her. And I think that if you've been involved in a custody battle, it's because you wanted to be with your child. And it is grating and upsetting, and it's even grief-striking when you fail to achieve that goal. Now, that custody battle in August 2022 gets to the point where Katherine's attempted to get sole custody of Griffith. Again, she's making these accusations towards her ex. So one of the accusations that she makes towards her ex is that she just wasn't allowed any contact with Griffith, and she hadn't had contact with him apparently from the 31st of December 2019. And bear in mind, she was saying that Griffith was begging her to come and get him. And if you were a loving parent and your child is asking you, begging you, beseeching you, please come and get me, and maybe you have had a fractious relationship with the ex, maybe there has been abuse, you are desperate, of course, to ensure that your child is safe with you. Now, Katherine also said that one of the real problems in the relationship between Griffith and his father was that Griffith was gay. And unfortunately, when he confided in his dad that that were the case, his father reacted really badly. He wouldn't let him out of the house. He wouldn't let him go to school, which, if that is actually true, is both disturbing and horrific for Griffith. Because, first of all, there is nothing broken or wrong with you because you are sexually attracted to the same sex. It's as simple as that. We all know that in our enlightened society. But I also appreciate that dependent on the mindset of the parent, that does not play out in reality for every child. And so to deal with the feelings of isolation and abandonment by your father when you've confided in him, and also to feel a prisoner in your own home, which apparently, according to Griffith's mother, is happening, that is going to be a cooking pot of possibility where rage and anger is concerned. And the idea that you're withholding education from Griffith is really abusive, if it's true. Now, Charles also allegedly tried to turn Griffith away from his mother. We see this so often where parental alienation is concerned, when one parent is just really negative about the other parent in an attempt to warp the child's idea about that parent. And his mother is obviously desperate to prevent this from happening. So apparently one of the things that his father would do is he'd look through Katherine's social media, he'd try and find anything that would make her look bad. So maybe if she was dressed in something that he didn't think was appropriate, or she was hanging out with people that he didn't believe were appropriate, these kind of things were then used to example why she was a bad mum. And Katherine actually said that she developed PTSD because she was being stalked and harassed by Charles. She asked the court for a no contact order. She also asked the court to order Charles to take Griffith to child therapy, and she said this child may already be suffering emotional irreparable harm by Charles's parental alienation and emotional abuse of the minor child. And with respect, it is absolutely devastating for children if the parent is being really negative about their ex in front of them. And certainly if they're trying to make that child reject the parent that they love, because it's psychologically abusive on every level, it's emotionally abusive on every level, but it's socially abusive too, because you were denying the relationship with the other parent. Now, at this point, Charles isn't happy, shall we say. Griffith's father is not impressed by what he considers are outrageous claims about him and slurs towards him. So he reports at this point that Griffith doesn't want to see his mother. He also says that Katherine was mentally and emotionally unstable. He said that she abused alcohol, that she abused drugs, and that might be true, that she had some kind of dependency issues. Equally, you could say, well, she's working as an online teacher, so she's functional. So we're not talking about somebody who's incapable of acting in a way in accordance with keeping a job. And I think that's really important to note, because all of this is hearsay to some degree, and we have to acknowledge that for Katherine, she was trying her best to live a life where she was working and effective and a teacher. So she isn't somebody who is completely incompatible with day-to-day experience of being functional. Now, he said, as the father, that he actually stopped letting Griffith communicate with Katherine because she'd apparently texted Griffith a handwritten suicide note in 2020. Now, that would be devastating for Griffith. It's also highly inappropriate if a parent does that. The idea that you would take your own mental anguish, which is awful. If Katherine was going through those feelings, that's terrible. If she's dealing with suicidal ideation, that's incredibly consuming. But you know what? You don't have a right to do that to your child. You don't have a right to put all of that emotional burden on them. And children are powerless. They can't change anything. And that means that they feel this burden without having any power to do anything positive about it. And you can understand if she actually did that the father would feel that that was toxic and inappropriate. And the father also accused Katherine of only basically calling Griffith when she was manic, and she actually posed as an adult male on Discord to contact Griffith, and apparently that communication was trying to encourage him to run away. If that happened, again, that's highly inappropriate. But we also have to see this in the backdrop of a very acrimonious relationship breakdown and people acting very badly, probably in comparison to how they would act if they were feeling well adjusted and going through more typical day-to-day experience. Like I said, when people are dealing with a sense of powerlessness and loss, particularly where children are concerned, it can make them do things that, shall we say, do not suggest in the moment that they are the person that they truly are at heart. And they come across as slightly unhinged, and it certainly sounds like that's happening with both parties here. So we get to the 14th of February 2023, and this, I believe, with the benefit of hindsight, would have meant that if Griffith's father had actually known what was about to play out, he would have happily packed a taxi with Griffith in it and sent him onwards to his mother's. Because believe me, no matter what was going on in that divorce, I don't believe either parent knew the kind of child that they were helping to create and the consequences of that creation. And bear in mind, I'm not laying the blame of Griffith's actions at his parents' feet. Under any circumstances, that would be completely inappropriate. I'm saying there are contributing factors to why individuals act in a certain way. Let's take a psychopath. Psychopaths are born. The belief is that 1 in 100 people are psychopaths. And some people believe 3 to 5%. Obviously the 5% are, I would say, a little bit on the pessimistic side. But okay, let's go 3% because of the male population versus the female population, and it's higher in male population. Nonetheless, if you put that into context, psychopaths are not out there murdering people on the whole. And part of that reason is because if you're born in the right postcode, to the right parents, with the right privilege and the right opportunity, well, you know what? You can wreck a lot of lives without actually murdering people. And you can choose to make a huge amount of money by ruining people's lives and doing things in the business as a corporate psychopath that absolutely destroys everyone else around you whilst you do very, very well. So there's a spectrum, isn't it? But the contributing factors that activate the actions are powerfully important. So like I said, born in the right postcode, right parents, right privilege, right opportunity, you might be okay as a psychopath as far as not being as dangerous to the world as somebody like BTK, the serial killer Dennis Rader, because the activating factors there were different. We're talking about with Griffiths a really acrimonious divorce. We're talking about him apparently being imprisoned in the house. We're talking about sexuality issues that are being rejected. So there's a lot going on, a tinderbox, shall we say, within him that is going to ignite because of these feelings. But because the parents have been essentially very distracted with themselves and what they're going through, have they had on the eye on the ball where he is concerned? So like I said, I'm laying blame at the feet of the parents. So I'm saying they contribute to who he is. And within that contribution is activating factors. So this date, 14th of February 2023, very recent, Valentine's Day, a time where people are meant to be coming together for love. He places a call to 911. And when the police arrive at his home, they find his father, Charles, dead. He's been shot in the chest, he's been shot in the head. Now again, I am not American, that goes without saying, though I do occasionally try to do very bad accents in these videos. I apologise in advance for people who haven't seen any of those and then see me trying to do some deep South or New York accent. The point is, I don't know how to handle a gun. It's not that I don't fancy sometimes having a go shooting at a range. It's just, I'm not somebody who's a fay with actual real live ammo guns. And I bet if I was given an opportunity to handle one, I would struggle to shoot somebody in the head and chest. And I'll tell you why I feel that way. Because in a panic situation where I'm defending myself, I think you need to be really cool, calm and collected to be able to actually administer those kind of shots. I feel that in panic, usually, the gunshots would be more sporadic in the way that they hit. Because you might be letting the ammunition go because you're just desperate to save yourself, but you're not concentrating on impact. A gunshot to the head, a gunshot to the chest, personally, that sounds like an execution to me. Griffith was 15 at that time. 15 at the time where he unloads those bullets into his own father's brain and chest. And the reason that he said he did that is that Charles apparently had threatened him with a knife. He had apparently chased him around the house. He also said that Charles cornered him in the bedroom and this is where he picked up a gun and shot him twice. Well, I wasn't there. I cannot say that didn't happen. But again, if I have a knife in my hand and I'm chasing my son around the house because I want to do some really, really awful harm to him, you bet your bottom dollar the moment I get into a room where there's a gun available, I'm going to be aware that there's going to be a potential of retaliation and I'm going to remove myself from that situation, or I'm going to be grappling that child to the ground before he gets a chance to actually grab the gun. I don't understand how, with this man chasing him, he doesn't just have time to grab the gun. He has time to grab the gun and to shoot his father in the head and chest. Timing-wise, that feels very challenging. Because like I said, if somebody is chasing you with a knife in a small environment, which the home would be, then they're going to be on you pretty quickly. Imagine what you have to do mind-wise to actually see the gun, grab the gun, turn the gun, shoot somebody, because the back's going to be to that individual you're running. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't add up to me. Now, after the police arrive and have that explained to them, then Griffith invokes his right to remain silent. Am I just a little bit suspicious here, guys? Is this just that I've been doing my job too long? Is it just that I've become cynical in my old age? I worked with young offenders for a decade. I've worked with young violent criminals, okay? And believe me, it was a privilege. I saw only the best in the vast majority of them. And the truth is, one of the problems that we had with our young people was that some of them were repeated offenders. So I'm not talking about them always being very violent. I'm talking about repetition of criminal acts, twocking, so taking without owner's consent cars, stealing, shoplifting, etc. And even though my job was to inspire change in behaviour, mentorship, and all the things that go with it, it was also really important that we advised our young people, because we didn't want them to have an array of criminal charges. So therefore, as part of our work, we would sometimes have solicitors come in. We even had police officers come in. They were very engaged with us and they would advise young people. And part of that advice would be, you don't need to say anything if you are arrested. In fact, it can be really, really helpful to make sure that you get your solicitor, not the duty solicitor. That was always one of the big pieces of advice. Don't ever work with the duty solicitor. Believe me, they just want to go home to bed. Get a solicitor that can actually help you and has your interests at heart. And like I said, that's not because we were trying to encourage crime. It's that we were also very much engaged with these young people and wanted the best for them and to change their behaviour. And sometimes they made mistakes en route to change. Let me tell you, it was so rare that any of those young people remembered it. They would just go in and just say everything and usually get themselves into more hot water or blame a friend and so on and so forth. They very rarely remained silent. This guy hasn't even got to the police station yet and he's remaining silent. There is something so calculating about that. Again, the calculation of the bullets, the calculation of the actions now. Now, understandably, the police at this point probably think to themselves, he's a bit like a stone-cold psychopath. He actually is charged at this point with first-degree murder. And police believed that the evidence of the scene that they're looking at just doesn't match Griffith's story. And like I said, listen, I'm not a ballistics expert. I'm not a crime scene investigation officer. I'm not an expert in those forensics. That's what they do very effectively. But I'll tell you what, I bet every single one of you watching this right now feels exactly the same. You don't really need any of that to see that this does not make sense. So Griffith's story just doesn't add up. He gets released on a $50,000 bond, and that bond is posted by his mother. Again, the fact that she bails him out demonstrates the fact that she isn't afraid of him, at least in an extreme form, and she probably sees this as a new opportunity to actually build a relationship with her son, to make good on the fractures that have occurred in her absence, and also to put right potentially some of the past that have occurred and gone before them. Now, after investigating for less than a month, in spite of the fact that the police have got some real suspicions about what's gone on, they actually can't disprove Griffith's version of events. They can't disprove that he hadn't acted in self-defence. And bear in mind, you have a mother who's basically said that the man who he was living with, his father, was an abusive individual. You know, there are reasons why maybe there had been an altercation and maybe he had been in fear for his life and maybe he'd stood his ground and shot his father. So therefore, the first-degree murder charge was actually dropped. So that means that he walks free. March 2023, he then moves to Florida and he ends up living with his mother in Port Charlotte. And this is meant to be a new start, of course, but it isn't. And the reason for that is his relationship with his mother is not brilliant. I'm not saying that it was dreadful because they describe it as tumultuous. Well, I guarantee some of you right now are listening to this after having a row with your 13-year-old or 14-year-old or 15-year-old, and they'll have slammed the door and they'll have wished you dead and they'll have said they hated you. They are things that are contextual often with teenagehood, and it's devastating for parents to hear that language, but it's also just part of the cycle of growing up and becoming a unique individual. And you look back on your teenage years as you become a more typical adult and you think, oh my God, what did I do to my mother or father? It's as simple as that. So we can see the context of tumultuous relationships playing out in so many households, but it feels like their relationship has got a different level and layer of problems to it. Now, bear in mind the fact that she's meant to have some mental health issues. And when you're struggling with your mental health, life is already overwhelming. And needing peace and tranquility and a sense of serenity is really powerfully important to just survive. If you add any extra stressor to your environment, that is obviously going to exacerbate your own problems. And it seems like she had these issues, but also he had these issues. He struggled with his own mental health. And Griffith was actually Baker acted in September 2023. It's a bit like in the UK, you have a voluntary or an involuntary section. So a voluntary section is one where you agree for treatment. It doesn't mean necessarily once you've agreed to go in that you can just walk out, but it's a voluntary statement that you will abide by the treatment that you were agreeing to. And then you have involuntary, which is where you're saying, I'm not going in, there's nothing you can do, and they will just take you because they feel that you're a risk to yourself or others. Very similarly, the Baker Act in Florida is a law that allows for the involuntary emergency mental health assessment and also the temporary detention of people who are experiencing a mental health crisis. It's also known as the Florida Mental Health Act. So in September 2023, during this period of time, Griffith states, I'll kill myself or I'll kill my mother by shooting or stabbing her. Again, let's bring it down to being a teenager. Teenagers say things that are heinous. They don't mean it. They're actually not action orientated. They are saying it because they are venting. I'll kill him. How many times have we been in situations with friends when we were kids ourselves and they are annoyed that a guy has started seeing a girl that they're like, I'll kill him. These things are said, and for the most part we can discount them and disregard them because it's just in the heat of the moment and we literally don't mean it. For example, I've joked many times on these videos that when I'm having a bad day, if you cross me, I set you on fire in my head. Big difference between that thought process and action. Would never do it, but in my head, it kind of relieves some of the stress when I see you in flames. But this seems deeper. And he's already struggling with his mental health. And he's already been involved in a death. So when somebody who has all of that, ingredients-wise, says, I'll kill myself or I'll kill my mother by shooting or stabbing her, it has to be taken incredibly seriously. Now, those words were actually taken very seriously. In Charlotte County, Baker acted him again the same day and they detained him for 3 days just so they could assess him, see whether there was any treatment that was required. November 2023, Griffith's also charged with domestic violence battery. And the reason for that is he battered his mother. Simple as that. There's no other way of saying it. He battered Katherine Griffith. She decided that she wanted to take his video game privileges away. So that was enough for him to believe that he had a right to push her to the ground. He had a right to stamp on her. And all this was witnessed by his grandmother. And that grandmother did corroborate his mother's account. So she wasn't lying about this. He was being incredibly violent towards her. Now, again, young people can feel a loss of control when people remove things of importance to them. And when people take video games from kids, it's no big deal for us adults because, hey, we are busy paying mortgages, dealing with rent, paying our accounts, dealing with day-to-day stresses and strains of work. So you know what? Video games and technology like that really doesn't figure in our heads because you don't really have a lot of time for it. But when you're young, you don't have all those responsibilities that I've just said. It is your connection with the wider world where you're speaking to a lot of people that you might share space with on the web. And it can feel like a real grief experience when somebody removes that. You feel like somebody's closed down your access to your world. So it isn't just taking away your video game privilege, it's closing down something of major importance to you. If you have a lack of control, if you have impulse issues, that's going to exacerbate reactions such as punching the wall, slamming a door, swearing, shouting. And they're all inappropriate, but we do contextualize this as children and young people struggling to manage their emotions at a time when they really haven't got used to the emotions that they're feeling, because we go through all of these transitions in our lives, and being a teenager is full of getting to know your emotions. In fact, psychological evidence shows that when we do research with 8-year-olds, they are more aware of their emotions than teenagers because of all the hormonal shifts, social shifts, psychological shifts, all of their peer experiences in relationships. It's really confusing. So like I said, there is a level of expectation. Not all teenagers are like this. Many teenagers just go through teenagehood in the most pro-social and serene of manners. I didn't. There again, I didn't have a video game, so I can't relate to it on that level. My own children have been a dream, but like I said, I wasn't. I was horrendous. Apparently the neighbours used to hear me screaming just up the road. So like they could hear me from my own parents' house down the road. I'm not sure whether my parents were lying to me about that, but genuinely, I didn't care at the time. That level of humiliation never actually bothered me enough to stop me getting angry. But for Griffith, we can understand that this feels like a violation of his world. But to actually then feel that you have the right to violently abuse your mother in a really, really hostile way and a really aggressive way, that says and speaks more of an individual with antisocial behaviour. Because to lay your hands on the parent who is providing for you, to reject her rules because you think that yours are more important, that speaks of a narcissistic intention. And I'm not here to diagnose this guy as a narcissist or a psychopath. I'm saying that when you look at his actions, you cannot help but note that he certainly has traits that seem very connected to those particular words I've just said. And his grandmother actually witnessed all of this play out. So she corroborated exactly what happened, that his mother's account was a truthful account. Now, on body cam footage from that arrest, Griffith's actually heard in the back of the police car talking about what had happened. He was talking to his grandmother at the time, and he said, I was saying, Mum, I'm not a psychopath. I'm not this murderer. I'm just trying to peacefully leave or peacefully coexist. He said she kept telling me to shut up and shut up. And when I wouldn't shut up, she hit me.
I was saying, Mom, I'm not a psychopath. I'm not this murderer. I'm just trying to peacefully leave or peacefully coexist and just figure something out. And she kept telling me to shut up and shut up. And when I wouldn't shut up, she hit me.
No, that's not what happened, Colin. That's not what happened. You never said you wanted to peacefully coexist.
So I've been saying that.
Now, with respect, the very fact that he's going, I told her I just wanted to peacefully coexist or peacefully leave, but what I decided to do was to batter her, makes absolutely no sense. You know, if somebody is having a bit of a rageful argument with me and is heating up and they're like, look, I just want to peacefully leave, or I just want to peacefully resolve this and coexist with you, the last thing I'm thinking is you're going to stomp on my head. I'm thinking probably you're suggesting that you don't want any kind of physical altercation. But no, apparently he goes, I want to peacefully coexist, I want to peacefully leave, but instead I'm going to beat you up. And actually his grandmother said, no, that's not what happened, Colin. You never said you wanted to peacefully coexist. And in another clip, his grandmother's explaining that Griffith did not want to go back to his mum's house and instead that he wanted to be placed in foster care. Now, anyone who's ever worked with any young people will know that this is something that kids, when they're having a bad time or having an argument with a parent, will often say. They'll be like, I just want to be in care. And you know that they've got a decent home. You know they're just going through a challenging time. You know there actually isn't abuse happening. And so you understand that that's coming from a place of helplessness and then wanting to change their situation. They haven't got the tools to do it, so they just think, if I just went into care, it would all be okay. So again, this is not outside the realms of a normal, typical conversation for a child or young person who is struggling in their environment. But again, we're talking about a young man who has killed his father, who has beaten his mother, who has threatened that he wants to kill his mother, and is now saying that he doesn't want to be in the home. I think we should be taking him extremely seriously. Now, despite all of these pleas, Griffith gets released the next day, and of course at this point is sent directly back to his mother's house, even though he's clearly said he doesn't want to, and is clearly shown that he is a danger to her. Now, just hours later, his baker acted again after jail staff report that he's saying he wants to kill his mum.
But I struggle with a kid that's being released from jail and saying, if you bring me back there, she's gonna die.
If we don't do something, then,
Shame on us.
Yeah, then we're not.
Shame on us that
then
we
we
didn't do our
failed.
job and we failed you. And I'm not failing you, nor am I gonna fail your son.
Now, one deputy actually explained this decision to Katherine and said, look, I struggle with a kid that's being released from jail saying, if you bring me back there, she's gonna die. If we don't do something, then shame on us that we didn't do our job and we failed you. And I'm not failing you, nor am I going to fail your son. Now, with respect, whoever that officer was flawless, in my opinion. To explain something in such common sense logic ways and to actually do it in such a compassionate, caring way is just testament to their professionalism. The fact that they're saying, you know what, it's a personal thing for me. I'd be failing you. I'd be failing him. I don't want something terrible to happen to you. And I would say there's a level of prophecy in that conversation. And like I said, he sees something and foretells something of future possibility in that moment. Now, when the police confront Griffith about those threats, he says, I'm in a constant state of fight or flight, and I don't know if I think she'd do something. Even if she's not, I might act. I'm not going to go like crazy or anything, but I'm not sure, honestly. So he's not trying to disguise his confusion. He's not trying to disguise his lack of control to some degree. He's suggesting that he's constantly anxious. When people are talking about fight and flight, they're talking about their cortisol levels and adrenaline levels basically flooding through their system, making them feel on edge. It's basically a way that we provide protection for ourselves when we think we're going to meet with hostile experience. And he's actually verbalizing that. So he's not pretending that he's okay. He's saying, I don't know. I don't think I'm going to do anything terrible, but I'm not sure. I would say that there's a real truth in what he's suggesting, because it sounds like he thinks he's in charge of himself at times, but then when he loses it, he's aware that he has no control over himself. Now, days before his mother's death, Griffith actually ran away from home. He goes to his grandmother's house in Auburndale. This is because he's got into a real big argument with his mother. And the reason that he got into an argument with his mother was over chores. Again, what does that tell you about him? You know, nobody likes doing chores. I genuinely wish that there was a magic fairy who came into my home on a daily basis and just tidied up the devastation. I don't know about you guys. I'm one of those people that I like to go to bed with a tidy house. So when I wake up in the morning, I feel like I can just breathe, and I can breathe for around 17 seconds. And then somehow, within 17 seconds of being awake and just trying to do some kind of nice little snack box breakfast for my daughter and putting the coffee on for my husband, suddenly, as I turn back around, my kitchen seems as if a marauding tribe of very, very dirty individuals have just come in and decided to throw things all over my floor, usually to put some sticky handprints, and I'm never sure who they belong to. It could be an infant, it could be a 22-year-old, all over my wall. And then I'll walk into the hall and all of a sudden all of those coats that were just there are now just under the letterbox, and it just goes on. And so the truth is, I would rather never have to do chores, but then I'd be on an episode of The Hoarder Next Door, because clearly no one would be able to get into my home and I'd just be weeping in a corner somewhere. The truth is, it's boring. I know that some of you watching this right now will be like, oh, Emma, I would love to come into your house and clean those walls. I would love to fold up those coats and put them away in some kind of really nice position in your place that I have now created because I'm an organisation person. I get it. Some of you do not have the same temperament as me. But for the most part, chores are a bit boring, aren't they? So the very fact that she's asking him to do them, of course, is going to annoy him. But for the most part, her house, her rules. It's as simple as that. She's paying the bills, do your chores. And they're not huge chores that he's being asked to do. But again, this is about him and her having this battle of control. He wants to be in charge. He wants to be in control. So when she asks him for anything, even something that is very simple, like doing the chores, putting the bins out, it is enough to make him feel like she's violating his space. She's trying to control his environment, and he needs to push back. And when he's at his grandma's, he refuses to go home. Katherine's upset because of this. She wants a relationship with her son. She attempts to reconcile with him. She goes over to the house of the grandmother and she actually speaks to Griffith and asks him to come back on the 8th of September. It's the worst mistake that she could have made. But again, this is testament to her trying to have a relationship. I'm not saying their relationship was perfect. It clearly wasn't, evidently wasn't. But she obviously is determined to have a relationship with him. Also, it would seem that very fact that she's going and trying to make peace with him, she takes some responsibility for herself in these situations because she is the one going and beseeching him to return. Again, in family therapy, which I worked in for a period of time, one of the things that we explore with young people who are having problems in their family dynamics is the symptomatic behaviour that can occur. So children can act out because there are a whole range of reasons that are going on behind the scenes that make them feel that if they don't keep this particular symptomatic behaviour, other things will be destabilised in their lives. So parents who are squabbling with one another, often the child might suddenly develop some kind of anxiety response or sickness. And when you unpick it, it's because they're trying to take the parent's anger, deflect it from there and cause concern about the child so that they're not angry with each other anymore, they're concerned for the child. And it takes away that bad energy and focuses on the child itself. And then over time, that becomes a neuroses and it's very problematic. But you can understand why it's there. So it's not as if she isn't noticing that there are problems in his mindset, in his behaviour, in his actions that are potentially symptomatic because of their dysfunctional relationship to a degree. But there is something about her willingness to acknowledge that she's probably playing a part in that means that she wants to reconcile with him. Now, I also accept that some people will say, well, it could just be that she wants to get him away from grandma because she sees that as a power dynamic issue where she says, how dare my mother be involved in this situation? She's creating a blockage between my son and me. So again, that could be another reason why she goes to reconcile with him. But she must have deep feelings for this child. It's not just about winning, it's about wanting, and in this case, wanting a relationship with him. Now, a night before Katherine dies, a friend, and who's also a neighbour, they actually get some text messages, and one reads, hey, please do not let Collin or the police into my home. I'm not opening my door. It goes on to say, Collin just hates me and I am so tired of this crap. Now the neighbour responds, where are you? And how am I going to stop him? So obviously a great neighbour, a great friend, somebody who wants to help. And the mother responds, don't give them the keys. I'm home in my room. Another reads, I'm going to sleep. I placed the bookshelf on the wall, cleared out Colin's room. I'm exhausted and I'm reading a book and sleeping. So there is a level of helplessness there. There is a level of losing it there. She's had enough, but there's also a level of warning there. She's saying that she doesn't want them in the home, and the likelihood is that's because she has a fear, but it's also probably because she's had enough and she's saying to herself, I've got to create some boundaries. And I would say that in this relationship, boundaries have been lacking. I also have total sympathy and empathy with parents who have lacking boundaries because they're afraid of the results if they implement them. Now, on the Sunday, she then texts the same neighbour saying that Collin is violating his probation. She actually said, I'm meeting with his probation officer Monday morning. If he doesn't come home by 10, he knows the time and deadline. He's choosing to skip it and hide out at my mum's house in Polk County, which is also a violation. So again, she feels that the mother of hers, the grandmother in this case, is actually validating the child's actions that could get him into trouble with probation. So she's fighting a battle not just with him, but also with her own mother. Now, the last text message that neighbour received was, he won't listen. I'm going to drive to get him. And if he doesn't get in the car, then Polk County can deal with him. So that classic end of her tether perspective, she's getting him back whether he likes it or otherwise. And unfortunately, she manages to get him back. And that's why on the 8th of September 2024, Griffith calls 911 for help. And the reason for that is because he's killed his mother. So he tells Polk County Sheriff's Office that he and his mother have basically gotten into a fight. I don't know, it's just sounding a little bit familiar, guys. I just got into a fight with my mother, a bit like I did with my father, and guess what? The result's the same. They're dead. You know, I think that one episode is something terrifying enough to unpick, but two, a little bit more than coincident with respect. So he says they've got into a fight. Apparently during the argument, Katherine had lunged at him with a knife and then fell on it, causing a deep stab wound in her neck. I kid you not. Now, let's just have a think about that. And by the way, the deep stab wound in her neck went all the way through. You severed everything. We're not talking about a nick. And we're not talking about an injury that is survivable either. We're talking about something that was very forced, very deep, and very fatal. So let's just run through how that would play out. Let's just say you are holding a knife in your hand. Now, I would imagine that if you're holding a knife for protection, you tend to hold it more waist area. You tend to hold it with your hand pointing down, so your thumb down to the floor, because understandably, you're trying to protect yourself. You're letting the person know if you come any closer, there's going to be a response. Or if I'm going to be attacking, and in this context, apparently we're being told that Katherine had indeed lunged at him. If I'm thinking about stabbing, I'm more likely to have my thumb up because I'm going to be thinking about stabbing in a downward fashion because I'm on the attack. I'm not defending, I'm attacking. Either of those ways, I'm struggling to know how if you lunge, either straight forward or downward, that you are then going to fall in a way where that knife turns all the way around, goes to the side angle, and then goes straight through your neck. Again, I'm not an expert in forensics, I'm not an expert in stab wounds, but just on a logical level, it's really challenging to imagine how that occurred. Now, the 911 operator doesn't obviously know exactly what's happened. All they're concerned about is making sure that Katherine, if she can be saved, is going to be saved. So she attempts to give Griffith instructions on how to carry out life-saving techniques. Then when Polk County Fire Rescue and deputies respond, it takes them moments, essentially, to pronounce Katherine dead at the scene. It was clear the moment they arrived that there was no way she was going to be able to be helped. So she was lying in the kitchen, she was lying in a pool of her own blood, and she had a 7-inch knife found next to her body. There was also no signs of a prolonged struggle, so it happened pretty instantaneously. Again, that doesn't really make sense when you're thinking about an individual saying that he was defending himself from the mother who was just lunging for him. Now, Griffith, understandably at this point, is arrested, is charged with first-degree murder once again. I mean, he's 17, and we're talking about him being charged with first-degree murder yet again. Now, witnesses, they told a very, very sinister story. They told detectives that they literally seen Griffith and his mum outside their home arguing. And at one point, Griffith grabs his mother by the hair, drags her inside, and Katherine is understandably and repeatedly saying to her son, let me go. She's literally pleading with him. Now, these are witnesses who have seen this 17-year-old man literally attacking his mother in broad daylight and dragging her around by her hair. Now, when deputies asked Griffith what happened at the scene, he just did what he did with his father. He became immediately uncooperative and he asked to speak to a lawyer. Now, again, I'm not saying that isn't an action that people should take. I'm saying that it doesn't exactly make you look innocent, in particular when you've already been through this blueprint before, because he's just reinstituting something that's worked very effectively for him prior to this, which is in the death of his own father. Also, a little bit like in the death of his own father, the investigators immediately start noticing there are inconsistencies in what Griffith said on the 911 call and the evidence that's discovered when they carry out Katherine's autopsy. It just isn't adding up. Now, unlike in the first case, where within a month, basically the charges were dropped against Griffith, this does go to trial. Also bear in mind that Griffith is saying, I didn't do it, I didn't kill her. This is absolutely a miscarriage of justice that I'm on trial and I'm an innocent person here. Now, the trial takes place in Polk County, Florida, and the judge who presided over it was J. Kevin Abdoni. The prosecution was led by Mark Levine and the defense was led by Amy Thornhill and Howard Dimmick. Now, of course, the prosecution are going hard on this. They feel that they have him banged to rights. They believe it is obvious that he is guilty. They play the 911 call, and at this point, what's interesting to note is that Griffith asks to be excused from the courtroom. This is whilst the actual call is played. Now, one could say that's because he's emotionally exhausted. He's devastated to have to hear those moments when his own mother is dying and when essentially he was present for her death and he's traumatized by that experience. We could also say that if you're quite a manipulative individual and you see the courtroom as a theatre, and let's be clear, that's exactly what the courtroom is. You know for a fact that there are lawyers who know damn straight that the person they're defending is an absolute murderer. They don't care. They just want to win the case. So it is a theatre. It's a theatre in front of a small audience of 12, the jury. But he walks out, and I would imagine that's quite powerful because the jury are looking and thinking, this guy doesn't look like a killer, because he doesn't, does he? He looks kind of a bit nerdy, a bit geeky, a bit sweet, I would say. You know, he looks like one of my boy's friends who hasn't quite grown into himself yet, who looks harmless to some degree, who doesn't look like a killer. And the problem is we have this belief system that is hardwired into our mind. It's a survival mechanism that if it looks good, it must be good. If it doesn't look like it's dangerous, it mustn't be dangerous. It's not true. And to our peril, we find that out time and time again. But it's a shortcut to survival. I must be able to trust that person because they look that way. I must be able to eat that fruit because it looks that way. So that plays against us in these circumstances. And certainly for a jury, seeing this kid, 17, walking out during the playing of the 911 call, it's quite emotive, isn't it? And if you are a stone-cold psychopath, or you are somebody with such antisocial personality, or you are an individual with Machiavellian tendencies where you'd rather be feared than liked and you'd rather win above all costs, then maybe, just maybe, you'll figure out that that would be an effective strategy. Now, they bring in various witnesses. One of them is Nancy Jones. She's the lady who actually saw Griffith and his mother fighting shortly before she's killed. So she saw Katherine Griffith literally being dragged around by her hair and dragged into the house by her son. Shortly afterwards, she hears sirens and police responding to the scene. So she is being dragged in to her death. Surely that makes sense. So she literally sees Griffith dragging his mother to her death. That's the reality. And then the police are responding. So it's happened imminently after she's been dragged in. Now, another individual who's brought in to testify is a forensic investigator, Brandy Bange. And they'd been responsible for taking photographs and swabbing him afterwards. And she said that it was really strange the way he acted. So he was apparently emotionless for the entire 20 to 30 minutes that she spent with him. She went ahead and photographed Griffith. She swabbed blood on him. He had absolutely no defensive wounds on his hand, which is strange when he's trying to suggest that he's basically been involved in an altercation where his mother has been going crazy and lunging at him. You would imagine there'd be some kind of defense wounds, some kind of bruising, even if it was just that he was running away from her. And also the emotionless side of this. Now, on one level, people will say, well, trauma does that. It does, of course it does. People can go very numb where trauma is concerned. But this seems quite calculated again, that he's letting them get on with it, but he's to the side of this situation. He's just kind of an observer as opposed to the individual who's present in what's really played out. They brought in Sergeant Michael Schneider. Now, he recalled being dispatched to a crisis unit at a behavioural centre because they needed help with the release of a potentially violent patient, Collin Griffith. He said, look, Griffith walked up to me and said, I need to be Baker acted. And when he questioned Griffith on this, Griffith said he'd either kill himself or his mother. So we have Griffith, on one hand, very unstable. His actions demonstrate that he's deeply unstable. On the other hand, we have Griffith basically saying, I know that I'm unstable. I know that I have a potential for danger towards other people and I need somebody to protect me. And this is the point where I have a level of empathy and sympathy for him, because he has been screaming to some degree about the fact that he struggles and that he doesn't want to be home and that he doesn't want to be around his mum and that he is a danger to himself or his mother. And they are very heavy words to express to a law enforcer. And I do genuinely feel that he was pleading for help. And not everybody who's antisocial, when their personality is concerned, is also somebody who lacks conscience completely. It is possible to have antisocial traits and to still have a level of conscience and a level of understanding about your capacity for harm. There are literally clients I've worked with, rarely with respect, but it's happened where a client of mine, before they ended up being referred to me by that department, walked into a police station and said, I am going to become a serial killer. And they hadn't committed any notable crime, but they felt they were going to do great harm. There was nothing that could be done. And they weren't deemed mentally unwell. They were deemed antisocial. They were, in the end, given an assessment of conduct disorder, an oppositional defiance disorder. But what I'm saying is they were basically saying, I know there is something really wrong with me and I need somebody to take me out of the situation where I know that one day I may act. But there aren't places where individuals like this can be taken out of their situation and put where they are safe unless they are actually demonstrating this capacity for harm. So it's a rock and a hard place for a lot of individuals. Then they brought in Deputy Kerry Welsh. Now, they told the jury that statements had been made by Griffith about harming his mother, about harming his grandma. He said that he'd done it before and he said he'd do it again. So he made comments about pushing them out of a car, stabbing them, shooting them. So he's basically saying, listen, you know, I've got some fantasies about how I do this. And when we have a backdrop of a parent who's already dead, this should be taken so absolutely seriously, because this is somebody who's already killed. This is not somebody who's simply angsty. This is somebody with the capacity to do great damage, and they have before. You cannot do more damage than killing somebody. And I do appreciate that people believe in a right to protect themselves. I believe that self-defense is always appropriate, but there is a big difference between defending yourself and actually killing somebody. Now, at this point, because the conversation had been about actually harming others, she placed Griffith back under the Baker Act, and she was actually asked to clarify what he'd said. So she said, yes, when asked, he did specifically say he'd done it before, and essentially that he was referring to the fact that he'd killed before and he would kill again. Now, that in itself is deeply incriminating. He's saying, I've killed before, I'll kill again. Not, I've defended myself at a point where sadly somebody lost their life and I'm traumatized by the reality of this, particularly in light of the fact it was my father, but more, I killed and I'll do it again. So there's an accountability and responsibility. There's an acceptance that he was a killer, not a defender. Now, in cross-examination, she actually said that Griffith felt really unsafe at home and said that he wanted to stay at the Baker Act facility. Again, I have a level of sympathy and empathy with that side of his nature, because he's actually saying to people, I don't trust myself, I'm not happy at home, I don't know how I'm going to respond and react, and I feel safe here. And that in itself demonstrates that he had an understanding of places and boundaries that made him feel contained and places and boundaries that failed to do so, which is evident at his home address. They also brought in Deputy Alexander Sharp. Now, Alexander Sharp testified about meeting Griffith, also meeting his mother and grandmother, and he described Griffith as calm. He said that Katherine was different. Katherine came across as nervous. She came across as quiet. She came across as scared of her son. And also that he documented injuries. So they were photographed that she had these injuries. It included redness and bruising on her stomach. Griffith had allegedly and apparently kneed his mother and kicked her. And this was because of that incident I talked about where he'd had his Xbox removed. He'd also had his phone removed, and this had led to that assault. They also brought in Detective Lacey Venoniani, and they admitted that Katherine was somebody who basically had a lack of boundaries. So she was essentially too soft on Griffith. But this detective said, listen, it was very clear that Katherine loved her son. She wanted to spend time with him. And it's also worth noting that in court, that detective said that she was relatively close with Katherine. She knew her, and said that, yes, in the past, Katherine had threatened and attempted suicide. And also she knew that Charles Griffith had been abusive to her. And I guess for Katherine, we can also therefore see her as a victim. And we can also note that when you are suicidal, sometimes that's because you're looking for an escape and you have felt trapped in your world. And it's a way of finding a solution to that situation. It could be the trauma from her abusive marriage. That had led to her feeling no other option than to leave this world. And clearly, just because she was somebody who had had some kind of suicidal intent before didn't mean that in the moment that she died, there was any suicidal ideation whatsoever. But of course, that's a story that the defence are going to push. Now, she said that she'd heard Griffith personally on several occasions say he wanted to harm, hurt, or kill his mother. And sadly, the DCF eventually returned Griffith to his mother. Now, Detective Venoniani said if it had been up to her, she would have absolutely separated them. And Griffith had actually said that he'd rather be in jail, in a psych ward, or in foster care than with Katherine. So whatever is going on in his mind, he doesn't want to be present with his mother. He's threatened her life. He's been very abusive to her. There are police officers who are saying it's not safe, and yet somehow he's back in her care. Now, that same detective said that Griffith was highly manipulative, but that he was also very respectful to his grandma and also very respectful to anybody who bought him things. Now, again, think about the kind of traits that we'd expect to see in somebody who kills like this. When you buy them things, that is obviously going to mean that you are working for them. If you are working for them, you are useful to them. It is only when you go against their expectations, against the worldview they've created, that you experience problems. And this detective said, listen, he gets furious when he's told no. And another thing that was brought into court was that apparently he loved that Katherine took him on cruises, bought him Starbucks, video games, and a phone, but he got furious if she asked him to do chores, like taking the bin out. So Katherine, again, is basically being blackmailed on every single level. She wants a relationship with her son. She loves her son. She's imperfect, as we all are. But the minute that she actually says to him, listen, you have to have some kind of responsibility in this household, she is punished. And the dynamics are really problematic there because it means he's in control as opposed to her. And at 17 years of age, you don't know how to control the bigger world around you. You haven't got the resources, you haven't got the wisdom, you haven't got the experience, and you do not know how to have stability in that situation. That's why it's important that you are taken care of by a primary caregiver, and undoubtedly Katherine, because of her fear around him, isn't able to do that. Another person who brought into court is Corporal Joella Moore. Now, Corporal Joella Moore said that Griffith had spoken to her about basically having different personalities. So he said Collin 1 and he had Collin 2. He said that Collin 1 just wants to survive and Collin 2 protects him and kills for him. And she actually heard Griffith say that Collin 1 would still let him kill his mum. So basically saying he's got Collin 1 who just wants to survive, which is ludicrous anyway, because like, let's be clear, Katherine is not some kind of megalomaniac, nasty abuser. Quite the contrary. She's somebody who's scared of her son. So he doesn't have a problem surviving. He's getting his bills paid, he's getting his food paid for, he's getting his Starbucks bought. It's hardly like he's dealing with some kind of horrendous experience in a war zone where nobody's there to protect him. And then he says that Child 2 protects him and kills for him. Now that's just an opportunity to feel sorry for the self and to say that there is a legitimate reason why you can act in the most unhuman and inhumane of ways, in this case, killing his mother. And the very fact that he keeps bringing into these conversations with people outside of the home that he wants to kill his mum should undoubtedly have been taken very, very seriously. Now, they bring in a forensic pathologist, Dr. David Garavan, and one of the things that that pathologist said was, listen, the neck wound on Katherine was large, it was gaping, it likely came from a single blade. He said the knife went through her esophagus, her windpipe, her vocal cord, and came out on the other side. He said that in all of the knife and stabbing deaths that he'd actually examined, most of them were homicides. He said some were accidents, but none were suicides, and said that her cause of death, as far as he was concerned in his experience, was homicide. Her neck wound was not consistent with someone falling on a knife. Now, it's really important that he brings in the fact that that was not the type of suicide that he'd ever seen, because, of course, the defence are again going to push Katherine's mental health issues. And believe me, they're going to have an advocate on their side that blows my mind in actually trying to push that narrative, but we'll get to that shortly. Now, Katherine's dad, so Griffith's granddad, he actually recalled Griffith becoming really aggravated with his mum and grandma. He recalled him saying something like, I'm tired of these two bitches. I want to see them bleed out. Again, really atypical language. Katherine ends up telling him that Griffith had threatened to actually harm his grandmother and her by killing them. And yet, in spite of the fact that Grandad heard this from Katherine, in spite of the fact that obviously he was worried, Katherine was saying to him, listen, I want a relationship with my son. I want to have him live with me. So there is a level of desperation around Katherine's desire to be with her son, and also a willingness to put up with things that she shouldn't to actually have that relationship in her life. Now, Detective Danny Peters, he got called to the stand, and he had to read out text messages and voice messages between Griffith and his mum. So he reads messages from Katherine like this. You said you hated me and I was an evil bitch. My dad is sending the recording of you planning my murder. Good luck hiring a lawyer. Now, with respect, she's threatening him to some degree because she's obviously losing a level of control over him and is desperate to retain some. And she's suggesting, we've got you on record basically planning my demise. You can't go about doing those things. You're going to get into serious trouble. She also sent messages about shutting down Griffith's phone, cancelling his car insurance, selling his car, pulling him out of school. Now, one of the last things that was recorded on the ring cam before Katherine sadly met her death was her telling Griffith to either get in the car and follow her, or she was going to call the police. And he also recorded a voice message that Katherine had sent to Griffith, and he said it said something like, I put your Starbucks outside because you threw a temper tantrum. So basically, they were arguing because Katherine had wanted help hanging something in the house. So every time Katherine asks for something, there tends to be a row, even when she's being super kind to him and when giving him Starbucks, for example, which he enjoys, because she's attaching that to, could you come and help me hang something up in the house? He's just refusing. So she's putting the Starbucks outside because she wants to let him know, well, if you're not going to help me, I'm not going to give you nice things. But that is a red rag to a bull where Griffith is concerned. Now, in cross-examination, Detective Peters said Katherine had a problem when it came down to following through. So she didn't follow through on those threats. So she said she was going to get the car towed, but she didn't. And when questioned about the ring video, Katherine basically said that she cut her own hand trying to open a jar. So she basically was suggesting that if she was injured, it wasn't her son's fault. And the defence actually suggested that maybe the chatter about murder was from a video game, like Roblox. I kid you not. That's what the defence said. Well, it could just be that, going through all of the things that have been said before, like to all the professionals, to the detectives, the fact that he's killed somebody as well before, that maybe this is actually about him discussing killing people. But we're saying that in spite of the fact that it sounds like he probably is discussing killing people, it could just be that he's discussing Roblox. Just a video game. Just forget about it, jury. Just discussing a video game. Absolutely. Ignore all the other evidence. It's the video game. Honestly, I just don't get it at all. This case has just baffled me on every single level. And by the end of it, I'm pretty sure you'll agree with me. Now, before I tell you about the next section in court, there is a saying, you'll all be aware of it, and it says, with friends like these, who needs enemies? And with respect, when we think about family, on the whole, close family, really close family, we kind of think, yeah, there'll be more our friends. But like I said, with friends like these, who needs enemies? And I'm referring to Katherine's own mother, Susan Deathman. I kid you not, guys, that's her name. Susan Deathman. If this wasn't talking about the death of two people, that would make me giggle. The fact that the mother in this case, the grandma, is called Susan Deathman. But in the context of the fact that we're talking about the death of her daughter, it just is not comedic at all. Katherine's mother, you would imagine, would be devastated. Her grandson has killed his father and now his mother. But more importantly, her daughter. Now, I appreciate that you love your grandchild in spite of them being and acting in ways that you would never wish to validate or accept. I also note that there are people who can visit people who have murdered people they love in prison every single week and see the best in them, even though they accept how immoral and wrong they were. But it feels like Susan Deathman hasn't got the actual memo on that. Because as opposed to testifying in favour of her daughter, she testifies for the defence. Like I said, with friends or family like this, who needs enemies? So she said that in January 2024, there was a time Griffith stayed with her for weeks and Katherine forgot where he was. Now, who knows? I wasn't there. I wasn't with Katherine at this point. But I'm just going to throw it out there. I would imagine if you were to knock on Katherine's house and say, Katherine, do you know where your son is? She'd say, yes, he's with my mother. But apparently, that isn't the case, Susan said. She literally forgot where he was. Do you know where your son is? Oh, gosh, no. Do you know where your son is at all? I don't know who my son is. What's the sun? I don't know what the sun. Do you mean the sky? The sun is there above my head, glowing like yellow. No, your actual biological son. No, I've no idea. Not got any idea where he is. Would that ever happen? But you know what? What's that going to do where the jury is concerned? Oh, neglectful parent, maybe dependent parent who's just so high that she doesn't even know where her son is. This mother stroke grandmother actually told the jury about multiple instances about when Katherine attempted suicide. Now again, what does that tell you? So another thing that she brings into court and tells the jury is that Katherine had had multiple suicide attempts. I just cannot connect with this. As a mother, my child trying to take their own life, I would take some personal responsibility for their feelings. I would not blame myself. Of course, we can't do that. But I would feel what is going on in their world that they feel unsupported potentially. What is going on in their world that I don't understand the true gravity of their sadness? What can I do to help them? I wouldn't bring it into court in this situation to suggest, well, she was very unstable, but that's what she's doing. And she also said that Katherine would regularly come estranged from family members, so periodically cutting them out of her life, stopping speaking to them, as if that isn't what so many family members go through in their lives. We've all been there. We've all had spats and fallouts with people that we love, and it's led to periods where we're not as engaged with them. That doesn't mean that we are somebody who should be disparaged in court, both mentally and socially. Also, she said that Katherine had a history of lying. Oh, honestly, I just cannot connect with Susan Deathman at all. To actually bring into court this absolute negativity and hostility about your child, even if she did lie sometimes, I mean, people do, how comfortable would you feel saying that to a group of strangers? Your child's dead. She literally had her throat and esophagus totally severed. The knife went straight through. And here she is basically ripping her daughter apart in court. She also claimed that it was her daughter who was violent to Griffith. Apparently she beat him up with a belt, made him do push-ups, held a weight over his head while he ran in one place. Can we just stop for a minute and just think about that statement? Griffith kicks off when you ask him to take the bins out. Griffith beats her up when basically she asks him to help with chores, and when he refuses, she removes his PlayStation. Griffith kicks off because his Starbucks that she's bought for him is put outside the house. Griffith violently attacks Mother in front of Grandma, even though Mother has done absolutely nothing to him. And we're expected to believe and make the leap that somehow, even though just asking for help putting the bins out gives this kind of reaction from him, that she could actually demand he hold a weight over his head while running in one place. Come on. Absolutely no logic there whatsoever. But bear in mind, the jury are hearing this. The jury are hearing these detectives come in, the forensics come in and say, listen, Katherine's a victim here. And then you've got the mother of the victim absolutely denying that the personality that's been introduced by all of these others is in keeping with who she really was. And instead she's saying that she's an abusive, lying, physically dominant individual who can't be trusted, essentially, and even forgets where her own son is. She also said that her daughter handed Griffith a gun and instructed him to kill her. That's just hearsay, but it's powerful, isn't it? And apparently Katherine also dared to complain about having to get up early to take Griffith to school. But with respect, that doesn't mean that she didn't love Griffith or want to take Griffith to school, but we've all liked to have a little bit more of a lie-in in the morning. So again, it isn't actually something that equates a negative parent, that particular trait, that she doesn't want to have to get up early. The point is she does take him to school, which evidences that she is a good parent. Now, when she was cross-examined, she was questioned about why she wasn't more afraid of Griffith. Obviously, he's killed both parents now. He's been violent in the past. And Susan said that she speaks to Griffith in jail on the phone 3 times a week. She encourages him to read the Bible and advises him on eating habits because she's a dietitian. So obviously, that's the most important thing when you've got a kid who's killed 2 people. You know, what you need to think about is getting more protein. If you've got more protein in your diet, you won't feel this level of rage. If you weren't nutritionally starving, maybe you wouldn't, I don't know, find yourselves in these situations where people die around you. Also, have a read of the Bible. It'll all be okay. Avoid Revelations, avoid that stuff. Actually, avoid the Old Testament. Just go for the New Testament. It's a lot more loving and forgiving. But just do that, it'll be fine. Honestly, that's what she said. She also said that she did love her grandson, she didn't want him seeing him go to prison, and that she didn't believe that he murdered Katherine. Now, the prosecution, understandably, and as far as I'm concerned, rightly so, accused Susan of being quick to throw dirt on her dead daughter. And she did, didn't she? I mean, she veritably buried her daughter in every way, shape or form, trying to protect her grandson. And by the way, just going to throw it out there, you want to create a narcissist, you want to create somebody with a real temperament to do harm and to care little about other people, never give them any responsibility or accountability. Make sure that they feel that they can do no wrong. Even when they are presented with reality, when they've done something heinous, defend them at all costs. And what's happening here? He's being defended at all costs, even when it comes down to the cost of totally disparaging her dead daughter's reputation in court. Now, she admitted that when Griffith lived with his dad, he did want to live with his mum, which is what Katherine said. She also said that Katherine had wanted to improve his life and that he was happy that he wanted to live with her. So she's admitting that he got what he wanted initially. He went and lived with Katherine and it was fine for a period of time. But then obviously life gets real. She also recorded in a conversation in which Katherine threatened to take away Griffith's Xbox and phone, and she said, yeah, he did get angry and he wanted to fight Katherine. So why are we saying Katherine's the problem here, when it's evident that she's witnessed Griffith being very violent? She also admitted that Griffith took a small blade kitchen knife from her home, but said he told her he needed it. Now, I mean, that's just great grandparenting, isn't it? I mean, you know, you're sitting there and the kid's like, Gran, yeah, I'm just gonna take your gun. Oh, why? I'm gonna take your knife as well. Why? What? Why? Well, I need them. Oh, okay, you take them then. Literally, like, oh, I'm not a grandmother yet. I look forward to the day when I am, but I am a mother. And if my child walked in at any age to my kitchen and took one of my bladed instruments and started to remove themselves from the room, and I was like, what are you doing with my knife? What are you doing with the scissors? And they were like, I just need it. There's a whole litany of questions, such as what do you need it for? My arts and crafts project. Okay, make sure you bring them back in 25 minutes or half an hour. You know, you keep some kind of eye on that situation. But if they were like, oh, I just need it, there is no way they are leaving that kitchen area with a knife, and I'm going to hide all the others and put air tags on them all so I can track them, because you don't want a young person having access to anything that causes them self-harm or other people harm. But apparently it's fine. At the end of the day, he said he needed it, so she allowed him to take it. Now, later that same day, Katherine actually told her mother that she feared for her safety. Now, bear in mind, the only witness the defence had for Griffith was the grandma. There were lots on Katherine's side, but with respect, just one who was there to vouch for Griffith. And that tells a story in itself, right? But as I said, this case is one that is going to blindside you. When they did the closing arguments, basically the prosecutors focused on Griffith's hatred for his mother and also the brutal nature of her murder. Now, I would say that hatred is probably the wrong word, because this is a young man who does not necessarily have the scope for those feelings. It's more that he has a level of rage when people deny him, and you will have consequences should you fail to give him what he requires. So he doesn't have to hate you to do something to you. He just needs to have that feeling of rage. The defence, they asked the jury if it's reasonable that Katherine knew the outcome when she allegedly picked up the knife and threatened her son. So they argued that he acted in self-defence. Amy Thornhill, she stated that there was no way of knowing what happened inside the house and suggested it's plausible that Katherine wanted to die by suicide by son. Now, we hear about suicide by cop. We do hear that when somebody is armed and are told to put down their weapons and they just keep walking forward, or they pick out their gun to actually use. We know that sometimes that is not because they intended to harm the police officer. It's because they are at a point in their life where they just want somebody to make the decision for them. It's rare, but it definitely happens. But in my experience, and I've got quite a lot now, I've never heard of suicide by son. Just doesn't happen. Because, you know, most parents want to protect their kids, so they don't want their kids to feel responsible for your death. And also, there are far better ways of making that choice, which is to quietly do it, privately do it, because the reality is that you don't want to traumatise a child that you brought into this world. But apparently, that's what they're saying. Amy Thornhill is suggesting, you know, maybe it was self-defence, but actually maybe she just got what she wanted. So maybe we're talking about Katherine as a victim, when in fact, she was just somebody who chose to die. It's just ludicrous. It's ludicrous. Absolutely ludicrous. But nonetheless, this is what happened. So we get to the verdict, 5th of February 2025. Oh yes, it's only recently happened. And the jury found Griffith not guilty of murder. Can somebody please explain this to me? Answers on a postcard, carrier pigeon, whichever way you want to get them here. It is just breathtakingly bizarre. Now, of course, if he had been convicted, he would have actually faced the possibility of life in prison. Now, this has been a very controversial verdict, and I'll tell you one of the reasons why. The jury were not actually made aware that Griffith had killed his father only 18 months before his mother's death. Now, I appreciate that the reason for that is what people will say is it would have prejudiced the jury. But personally, I think that's vital information. If the mother has turned up dead a year after the father, surely that tells a story that needs to be told. Now, a comment was made after this ruling by a guy called Tom Gilhooly. He's from Foley and Wilson law firm. And he said, I mean, it's not often that a case with such high stakes comes down to such a crucial evidentiary ruling. He said, I think that anyone looking at this case is going to feel that the ruling to keep that information away from the jury was monumental. In fact, it was probably the biggest factor in the defendant being found not guilty at the end of the trial. Now, I would argue, no, what was the biggest factor aside from that was the grandma absolutely decimating the personality of the mother who'd been murdered in this case. I think that was very, very compelling for the jury. Now, Polk County Sheriff Grady Judd, they believe that Griffith is absolutely responsible for both deaths. He said that the father's case actually might be reopened in the future. They said the jury determined that they could not convict him beyond and to the exclusion of all reasonable doubt. During our investigation, detectives found witnesses that believe he also murdered his father in Oklahoma. That investigation is ongoing. Now, in a short statement after the trial, Amy Thornhill, who was defending Griffith, said, I appreciate all of the attention the jurors paid to what was presented to them. It was a difficult decision, and I thank them. Yes, it was, wasn't it, Amy? It was a difficult decision, but it was one that was in your favour. You won. But did you? Did you win? When you went home that evening and you got into bed, maybe in the loving arms of a partner, maybe you have children, did you really think justice was done? Did you really think that your job to actually defend this person played out how you hoped? Did you really feel at peace? Because I don't feel at peace knowing about this case. I feel devastated by it. When you went to bed at night and all those involved in the defense, did you feel safe knowing that he's walking the streets? Do you feel safe in the knowledge that he'll never kill again? Because when you think about an individual like Griffith, he's told people time and time again, he has the capacity to kill. He has the willingness, clearly, to kill. So what's going to stop him killing again? Like I said, court's theatre. And sometimes it's a tragedy that plays out. And certainly, in this case, it really has been. Do you think, guys, that he's going to strike again? Do you think that the jury got it right? Or are you as astounded as me? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I feel really angry for Katherine. I can't believe her own mother abandoned her in such a horrible way in court. I cannot believe the reputational damage that happened to her. She was violated in life, and undoubtedly she was violated by those closest to her in death. As ever, I will read every single one of your comments. Thank you so much for listening. This has been one that has made me feel really unsettled in the legal system, full stop. And I am deeply worried for anyone who spends time with Griffith. Pray to God that some kind of intervention occurs and he gets whatever help he requires. It's okay to feel a level of sympathy and empathy with certain aspects of who he is. And it's true, only he knows what really happened. But again, if you knew what really happened, and you knew that there was a travesty of justice, how would you feel walking the streets free? And what kind of mindset would you have to smile and walk forward in your life thinking, I've outsmarted them again, even if it was at the cost of your own parents' deaths? Take care, guys. Be safe, and I'll see you next time.